So today on the Regulated Pulse, we have Chief Magistrate Judge of Cobb County, Brendan Murphy. He has pursued a decades-long legal career primarily in Cobb County in roles such as Assistant Solicitor General, Senior Assistant, District Attorney, and in his current role as the Chief Magistrate. He has received the Cobb Bar Association Criminal Defense Section's Jimmy D. Barry Champion of Justice Award and was named a under 40 by both Georgia Trend and the University of Georgia Alumni Association. So welcome to the podcast.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Yes, very happy to have you. So before we get into your legal career, I actually wanted to start at the beginning and talking about your experience at UGA. As an undergrad, you pursued a bachelor's in history and political science. So I also wanted to ask what years you pursued your undergrad degree?
Sure. I was at Georgia as an undergrad from 2001 to 2005.
Gotcha. And where are you from?
My family moved around, so my folks are from New York, but I never lived there. I was born in New Hampshire, we lived in Georgia, we lived in Florida, and then Georgia again. And ultimately, I graduated from high school in Forsyth County. And so that's kind of where I went to high school, where I was applying for college before I went to Athens.
Gotcha. So were you always interested in pursuing law school and being a history and poli-sci major?
So I don't think I always knew I wanted to go to law school. When I was we don't have any lawyers in my family, anything like that. When I was in high school, we did have the Georgia High School mock trial program at my school, and I participated in that for a couple of years, and I had a really good time, made a lot of good friends, and the lawyers that were the local lawyers that were the sponsors of that were just really positive role models. So I thought possibly, I could pursue law as a path. As far as my major was concerned, I think I was always going to be interested in poli-sci and history. I was interested in the social sciences, and so that was a pretty natural fit for me to major in. But as far as going to law school, sometimes it's just kind of a life circumstance. I had met my now wife when we were both students at the Franklin Residential College. We lived in Rutherford, and we participated in that program, and she's a year ahead of me in school. And so she graduated from undergrad and then applied to the pharmacy school, and she got into the pharmacy school. And so she was a first year in the pharmacy school my senior year at Georgia, and so I kind of knew that I needed to find a way to stay in Athens one way or the other, and so that might have pushed me over the edge in applying for law school.
That's so fair. I mean, I also talked to you about how I had a similar story, just looking into okay, what graduate degrees does UGA have? I'd love to stay. So now, diving into your extracurricular involvement, I saw that you received the UGA Foundation Fellowship. So this is UGA's top academic scholarship that was founded in 1972 by UGA Foundation trustees. It's available through Moorhead Honors College. It provides generous academic funding, stipends for group and individual travel study, and research and conference grants. So how did you use your scholarship money?
Right. The Foundation Fellowship was a wonderful opportunity. It's what drew me to the University of Georgia. I felt so fortunate. Halfway. Okay. Yeah, that's what we usually do. Is it picking up background noise? Is that?
Maybe a little. I could hear little things.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the Foundation Fellowship was a wonderful opportunity. It really, drew me to the University of Georgia, and I'm so fortunate for my experience as a fellow. To answer your question, how did I use my travel stipends? So at that time, and the program has changed over the years from time to time. At that time, after our freshman year, it was a group travel study. So all of the rising sophomores, or we were second years by then. They had changed the nomenclature from sophomores to second years. So all the rising second years, we went on a travel study together where we were in both England and then we were in Budapest, Hungary. And so it was a wonderful opportunity with UGA faculty, and it was a great kind of community building as well, because all of the fellows in that class, we took the same classes, and then we traveled together during the program, and then after the program, most of us stayed in Europe for another time and traveled around together on our own, and so it was a great experience. Then after that, I used my travel studies for one summer. I went to Galway in Ireland to the National Irish University there in Galway City and studied Irish history, and that was a great opportunity. Galway is a wonderful university town, and Ireland is easy to travel around, and that was not a specific UGA program, so met students from all over the country and all over the world, and it was a great opportunity. And then my other travel study was to Cuba, and that was, at that time, it was a specific UGA program where there was a faculty leader. You did not have to be a UGA student, but most of the students were, and we studied Cuban culture and Cuban music and religion specifically. So the religion class, the Cuban religion, was out of the history department, so that worked out for me as a history major. And the Cuban music was a general elective, and it was a great class from a music professor at Georgia. And the cool thing was that program had two different tracks. So for students that were Spanish majors or who were studying Spanish in depth, they could actually take classes from Cuban faculty in the Spanish language. For students like me who were not Spanish majors or taking intensive Spanish classes, there were classes offered by UGA faculty in English. And it was a great opportunity at that time because, I'm getting older. That was before people could generally travel to Cuba. There was a ban on U.S. travel to Cuba, but for educational trips like this through UGA, the Treasury Department would approve this. So it was a approved educational experience through the university, and we went all over the country, from Havana to Santiago, and it was just a really great opportunity to be up front and close in a place that's so nearby. And Cuba had always been interesting to me because as a kid I grew up in South Florida, where there are so many Cuban Americans, and you hear the stories of the Cuban Revolution and the aftermath, and how Cuban immigrants helped to build South Florida. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to be there and experience that for myself. A great part of the Foundation Fellowship as well was they would take us on spring break short-term, what they called short-term spring break travel studies. And that would just be for the 1 week of spring break, and we would go with UGA faculty. And that was kind of a bid process. So the seniors got first pick, and the juniors got the next pick, and all the way down the line. And so our first spring break, again, it was a joint experience. They took all of the freshmen, all the first-year fellows. We went to New York and DC, which was great. And then my other spring breaks, one spring break we went to Egypt, one we went to Vietnam, and we went to New York and DC, and one we went to Costa Rica. And at that time, Costa Rica, UGA had a program in Costa Rica, so it was kind of a shortened version of that. And the other to Vietnam, and then also the other trip, it was with UGA faculty would come with us.
Definitely sounds very fun. I didn't realize there would be this many trips involved, but I mean, that's awesome. I wonder if I can apply for it, actually.
The fellowship mainly takes applicants from high school, but then there'd be a small pool of what we call midterm fellows. And I can't remember when they applied. I think it was sometime during the first year at UGA. The class would grow by 3 to 5 members, and then they would join the class as midterm fellows. But mainly a program for folks coming out of high school.
Yeah. I'm also not in the honors college, so boo there. But sounds like a lot of fun. I also saw that you were the mock trial Association president at UGA?
We had started back up a mock trial program, and so I helped start back up the undergrad mock trial program. The state of Georgia has such a strong high school mock trial program, which is run through the Georgia Bar Association, and so I'm so fortunate that it was at my high school. It's a lot of fun now as a judge, because as a real life judge, because I get to go back each year and volunteer as a judge for the high school mock trial. And so for whatever reason at the time we were in school, Georgia just didn't have an undergrad mock trial program at that time. And so myself and some other people were able to kind of get that restarted because the state has such a strong foundation from North Georgia, South Georgia, Atlanta, all over, of students who had been through the program as high school students. So that was a great opportunity to get to restart a program at UGA.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. And then also you were the Dean William Tate Honor Society president. So how was your experience doing that, and what did the roles responsibilities look like?
It was a long time ago. That's deep in the bio. The Dean Tate Society is, my memory is for freshmen. It's an honor society for freshmen or coming out of freshman year, and it was such an honor to be selected as president from so many competitive and driven and wonderful people. And so it's Dean Tate was a larger than life figure at UGA, and his career sent so many students onto the path of leadership in our state. So he's just a huge inspiration, and it was a great opportunity to get to know people all across UGA. Because sometimes you may meet people in your dorm or you may meet people in your program, but it was a great opportunity to meet students from all over UGA and kind of create lifelong friendships and give back, right after your freshman year.
Awesome. And then lastly, you were a Philip Alston Fellow that is now a UGA law program, but in your bio it showed it under undergrad. So did the program evolve to now being for law school?
So I'm not familiar with the law school program. Sometimes, when there are donors that have been so good to UGA, sometimes they have multiple programs under the same giving. For me, each UGA Foundation Fellowship, each undergrad Foundation Fellowship was funded by an individual or a group. And so, for instance, Bernard Ramsey, you might know that name because you're familiar with the Ramsey Athletic Center, right? And so Mr. Ramsey was a great benefactor of the University of Georgia, and one of the things he did was he ended up giving the money to make sure students are healthy and active by building that center. He also gave a great sum to the Foundation Fellowship to expand the program. So whereas it used to have been, when it started out, maybe it was 5 or 10 students a year, then it became 20, 25, maybe up to 30 at this point. And so my particular Foundation Fellowship was funded by Mr. Alston. And so it was just different endowments. And so mine just happened to be from Mr. Alston. And so that's what that was.
So how did your numerous extracurricular involvements help you as you progressed to law school and pursued your career?
Sure. So one of the great opportunities that I had at Georgia, and specifically through the Foundation Fellowship, was the program matched undergrad students with professors in a mentorship. And so my mentor through that program was Professor Dan Kooning, who was a professor in the law school. And so I generally, as an undergrad student, would not have had access to a law professor to get to have that mentorship and that learning both formally and informally. And so he was just such an impressive scholar and generous with his time, and he was instrumental in me considering, hey, maybe law school is something I'd like to do. And so that was a huge bridge essentially from college to law school, and thinking, hey, I can do this. This is something, and not only can I do this, but this is something I'd like to do. So really, that relationship was key. And then kind of like I was joking earlier, that sometimes life is more than a resume. Life is three-dimensional, and the idea that I had met my now wife, and I was going to stay in Athens one way or another. And so applying to law school was really a natural step with my major in political science and in both in political science and in history. And to be able to stay on in Athens was a wonderful thing. And I always tell, sometimes students will come now and say, oh, should I go straight through to law school, or should I wait? Some students want to do a gap year or two before going back to law school. And I always tell students that there's no right or wrong way for that. For me, because of my particular life circumstances, the right answer was to go straight through. But for other people, they may need a break. They may need a brain break from school. They've been in school since they were kindergarten continuously. And so I always tell folks there's nothing wrong with taking a break, but if law school is ultimately the goal, I counsel folks and say, hey, just make sure you give yourself a time limit, because sometimes it becomes hard to go back to professional school or go back to graduate school. If you're out in the working world and you're making money and you're establishing yourself in the community, it can be hard to uproot yourself and go back into the school mindset. So if you decide that taking a break is best for you, try to give yourself some kind of time limit that says, okay, well, I'm going to take this break, I'm going to explore what I want to explore in the working world, and then I'm going to go back to law school by whatever year you decide is appropriate.
That's fair. Also, going back to how you were paired with the mentor that was a UGA law professor, did you mention how you got paired through?
I don't remember exactly how they paired us up, but it was definitely by interest area and not random. So, for instance, there was my wife is a genetics major, among other things, and there was a wonderful genetics professor at Georgia, and she would be a mentor to the undergrad fellows as well. But somebody like me in the social sciences and the humanities, they were able to pair with a law professor. So it was some kind of intentional pairing of, okay, this student is interested in this, and this professor has expertise in this.
Gotcha. So it was through the foundation fellowship.
Correct. Yes.
Gotcha. Was the UGA mentor program up then?
I don't remember if the UGA mentor program was up then, and because we had, as fellows, we had this process where we had this kind of mentor through the foundation fellowship. I'm not sure. I would not have pursued it otherwise, because we already kind of had that mentorship relationship through the program.
Oh, it was established in 2019.
Oh, the mentor program?
Yes.
Oh, well, there you go. I guess that answers that.
Yes. I mean, it's an awesome program. I mean, I've connected with so many people through it. And then one of them, this was when I was considering being a Terry major. This was like September of my freshman year. Like, I wasn't sure what to pursue, and, like, we still talk, and it's like now it's like mostly about random stuff, like we're genuinely friends. But I mean, it's a great way to just be able to talk to people that otherwise you would never talk to, and then it makes it a lot easier to just like reach out to people, because like they do want to talk to you. This isn't like a cold message on LinkedIn. They're invested in UGA students, and they are very much like are always excited to talk to you.
I serve as a UGA mentor now, and I feel like during COVID times I had more requests, and you would do a lot of because we're here in the Atlanta area. Obviously, a lot of the students are in Athens, and so we would do a lot of connection by Zoom or by phone call. But it's kind of fallen off lately. I guess I need to dust up my resume and make sure that I can get some new mentee candidates. So
that's fair. I think there might be over 7,000 mentors on it now, but I mean, this is a common experience I've had. Like when I talk to other mentors, they just don't get a lot of requests. The one I was talking about that I've been talking to for nearly 2 years. I mean, I was like, oh, have you worked with any other mentees? And she's like, yeah, like one girl, I had like a Zoom with her to polish up her resume since she was an HR major, but that's about it. But I definitely want to do it. One of my mentors actually, she's very involved in UJ, and she was like, they're going to create a student mentor program. soon, and she was like, I think you should do it. I'll keep you posted when it comes out. And I'm like, that sounds very fun. And then you're just able to connect with them in a different way too, because like you know exactly like how UGA is like right now, and get to. Okay.
We're here on the second floor, so Magistrate Court, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but we're the People's Court, so we're close to the people. We're not in an ivory tower, we're just right here on the second floor. So sometimes we'll hear people come out of the courtroom and complain about our rulings, because the bus stop is also right beneath our window. So it's not uncommon to hear people come out of the courtroom and complain about whatever just happened in the courtroom when they're waiting to get a ride. So we're here and we're very accessible.
I actually haven't. I've definitely been to Marietta before, but like this area where the court is, it's like this is actually a really nice area. Like I think I want to go just like downtown and like check out the restaurants and shops sometime.
Marietta is wonderful. I did not have any connection before getting my first job here in Marietta in Cobb County, and it's a very open and welcoming community. The Marietta Square, as you referenced, it's amazing. It's come a long way in a short time, and there are now restaurants and bars and shops, and it's really a 24-hour location. There's always something going on the square.
Awesome. And then now going into your experience at UGA Law, so you talked about how earlier, this was not recorded, but we were chatting about how law school really prepares you how to think. It's not about sitting here and like memorizing the likely tens of thousands of statutes, but really being able to ask the right questions or answer them as well. So how was your experience?
Yeah, law school is a great experience. It's a difficult experience. It's a shared experience. In some ways, we would joke that when you go to law school, it's a little bit like going back to high school. That literally, even we were just talking about this the other day, at the University of Georgia Law School, there's literally a locker room, like where you have a locker, just like people in high school would have a locker, because you would, you had a lot of books as a law student. You keep some books there, and then you go to the law library and you go get the other books. And it's not, we've been able to discuss a little bit about your interdisciplinary path and how you've hand curated a wonderful educational program for yourself that hopefully other students will be able to access in the future. Law school is very different. Law school is, in the first year especially, a set curriculum. And so at that time at the University of Georgia, and I believe it's still the same, there were 3 sections, X, Y, and Z. And all of the students are taking the same classes. They may have different professors, but whatever section you're in, you are with those students for the most part all day, every day. So law school is very much a shared experience. And the University of Georgia Law School was a great experience. It was very collegial. It was appropriately competitive. People wanted to do well. They wanted to study hard and perform well, but not at the expense of each other. People understood that when you go to the premier law school in the state of Georgia, you're going to be colleagues. The people that you're in law school with are going to be your colleagues and your partners and your judges, and so and your lawmakers. And so it was a very wonderful environment. We were talking about a little bit earlier, law school is not about content. Going to law school, I always kind of counsel folks as well, law school is for lawyers. Law school is, there are lots of good grad programs that you can continue in kind of research and studying different areas. Law school is all about taking wonderful people that have studied hard and then turning them into lawyers. And you turn them into lawyers by teaching them how to think and research and communicate in a new way. And so law school is taught in the Socratic method, being asked, you do a reading and then you are asked questions. And so it's very different than anything you've experienced before. And you quickly learn how to adapt to that learning style. But it's, I can't speak highly enough about the University of Georgia Law School. It's a great experience, great professors invested in our success, but also holding us accountable, because that's how it is when a lawyer is out after graduation. That law school it's interesting, or being a lawyer is interesting. It's different than, for instance, being a doctor. A doctor, you go to med school and you have internship, and then you have residency, and then you might have fellowship, and then so you're specializing further and further and further as you go, and then you're authorized to do certain tasks, right? You're credentialed at each hospital to do certain tasks. Law school is not like that at all. Once you graduate and you pass the bar, technically speaking, on day one, you could try a murder case, or you could try a $50 million medical malpractice case. But of course, no one in their right mind is going to hire you to do that. They want to support you and train you and mentor you along the way, but it's very different. So on day one, the lawyer needs to know the skills of a lawyer. Again, how to think, communicate, and research like a lawyer, because that same formalized credentialing process that we see in other professions does not exist in the law. So law school has really got to get you ready. And one thing that is a great benefit of the University of Georgia Law School, and now many other law schools are also coming along in this way, is making the third year of law school, the final year of law school, more experiential. So I kind of mentioned the first year is a set curriculum. All lawyers need to know about these things, and whether that's University of Georgia or another law school, it's all roughly the same things. Then in your second year at Georgia, the way it works is there's some strongly suggested courses. For instance, constitutional law. At other law schools, that may be required as part of the first year curriculum or second year curriculum. So the second year is a mix of strongly suggested courses plus a mix of electives, kind of whatever you are interested in. And then the third year is more electives, and most people will try to do some kind of externship program. And that's when you go from the law school into a practice setting, and you can kind of see how everything you're learning is applied in a real legal practice setting. And that program for me at the University of Georgia Law School was the prosecutor clinic, the prosecutorial clinic, and that was instrumental in kind of setting my career on where it ended up, doing that prosecutor clinic through the University of Georgia Law School.
Awesome. I had some questions about how you were Student Bar Association president, so how you gained the position, and then involvement with SBA prior to the role.
Sure. So I was always interested in serving in student government, helping my fellow students. I had been the student body president at my high school, and my friend and I actually ran for student government president as undergrads at Georgia at UGA, and that was a big, fun, exciting campaign, running campus-wide, and we came up a little short. We came in second place, but that's okay. And so when we were back at law school, just Student Bar Association was something I was involved with, and I was able to run for Student Bar Association president and win. It was just a great experience to be able to, help the law school continue to grow and advance and serve students from a student perspective, and I feel very fortunate to have been able to serve in that role.
Awesome. And then now going into the experience in your post-grad positions, so you've been working for the prosecution side since the beginning of your legal career, and primarily on that side throughout your career, such as being a third-year Practice Act intern at the Office of the District Attorney, Northern Judicial District. This was 2007 to 2008. So how was your experience there? And then also, I saw this was in Elberton, Georgia. So I had some questions about if you knew anyone in the area, did you have to move for this or commute?
Sure, that's a great question. So I was, let me back up a little bit. At that time, Georgia law would allow third-year students, if you were under the supervision of a prosecutor, then there were actually some tasks of a lawyer that you could do. You could actually get up in court and speak for the state and represent the state in the case as long as you were being supervised. And so I was able to do that, and now, fortunately, that program has expanded. So now we see third-year Practice Act students in other areas of the law as well that are being supervised and having that hands-on learning through practice. So for me, that came through the University of Georgia Law School's prosecutor clinic, and it was a 3-semester program. The spring semester of our second year was an academic class where we were learning the basics of Georgia criminal procedure, and our professor was a great professor, Alan Cook, who was a former elected district attorney in Walton County, nearby Athens, and he was a great professor, a great prosecutor. And so that first semester he taught us essentially the basics of Georgia criminal procedure, and then in your third year, both in the fall and the spring, he matched you with an actual prosecutor's office. And so you would go to the prosecutor's office as this prosecutorial clinic intern, and you would work, directly with prosecutors that were serving. And then there was also a classroom component that you would do once a week. And so most of the sites were located in Northeast Georgia. And so you would essentially, there was actually kind of almost like a mini career fair where a representative from each of the participating offices came and gave a little presentation, because different offices have different personalities and different emphasis. And so they did all the presentations, and then the students would kind of indicate their preference for where they would want to go, and then the professor would match up the students to the externship sites. And so I felt very fortunate to be in the Northern Judicial Circuit. It was a ton of fun. It's a wonderful community. So that judicial circuit is actually made up of 5 counties. And so it is Elbert County, Hart County, Franklin County, Oglethorpe County, and Madison County. And all of those counties are in Northeast Georgia near Athens. And so to participate in that program, I still lived at my same apartment in Athens, and I would just drive for the day wherever we were going. So the main externship site was Elbert County. That is where the elected district attorney had his main office. But in a circuit where there are multiple counties, the prosecutors, some prosecutors would be based in one county or the other, and some prosecutors would actually ride circuit and go to the different counties. So it was a ton of fun. We would get in somebody's pickup truck, and we would drive out to a county, and we would have court for the day. And you learned a lot because those circuits do a tremendous amount of work with very little resources. They may not have the same kind of budget that a DA's office in the Atlanta area would have, but they did a lot of great work. And so it was a ton of fun. I learned a lot through that externship, getting to question witnesses and prepare cases for trial and work hand in hand with the district attorney, waiting on verdicts. And so we had a lot of fun in the Northern Circuit.
Awesome. And then post-grad, you were a private practice civil litigation attorney for 2 years, responsible for state and federal court matters. This was between 2008 and 2010. So can you go into your experiences there, and then how that contrasted with your previous role in the Northern Judicial Circuit as well?
Sure. So what's typical in law school is whatever internship somebody gets in their second summer, the summer after their second year in law school, typically you're trying out for a job at that point. It's very common to have an internship in that 2L summer going into your third year, and then if everything goes well, that entity ends up hiring a lot of those folks for a full-time job once they graduate and pass the bar. And so I actually went to a career fair. It was a career fair held at Georgia State University Law School, but it was open to students. It was just open generally to students. And at that career fair, there was a law firm represented here in Marietta. It was about a 30-lawyer law firm, and I was able to get a summer internship there, and then turn that summer internship into a full-time offer from when I graduated. And so you're right, I had, through the prosecutor clinic, developed a great love for criminal law and aptitude for criminal law. But that summer of my 2L year, I had worked for a civil law firm. And the civil firm here in Marietta specialized in, the part I worked in, specialized in representing school boards. And so it was a very special opportunity because it was such unique work. There are only a handful of law firms in the entire state of Georgia that represent school boards. And when you represent school boards, you get to work with educators. And we talked a little bit, I think, offline about your experience taking classes in the education school. Educators are just 100% mission focused. They love what they do. They want to help young people grow. They want young people to learn. And so as a lawyer, getting to work with educators is extremely inspiring and a very special opportunity. So coming out of law school, when I had a job offer to work for this civil firm with this very unique opportunity, or to kind of work in, maybe my first love, so to speak, in criminal law, I decided that, number one, the people at the law firm were so great. They were just great lawyers, great mentors, and they worked in such a specialized field that was a unique opportunity. When they were trusting me to join them as part of that unique opportunity, it was an offer that was too good to say no. And I'm so thankful that I went with that firm because that's where I learned how to be a lawyer. I did not have any connection here to Cobb County, and they took me in, and I became a part of the community and got to work with our elected officials on the school board, and got to learn from some great mentor lawyers about what it means to be a lawyer day in and day out and represent clients, work hard, study for your clients. It was a great opportunity. We had a lot of good work at the law firm.
That's awesome. And then between 2010 and 2013, you transitioned to a role as the Assistant Solicitor General for Cobb County, focusing on all phases of misdemeanor prosecution.
That's right. So when I decided to leave the law firm, one of the partners, and I told him I was going to go to the solicitor's office, one of the partners told me, well, that's kind of backwards. And what he said is true, that there are a lot of people that begin their legal career in a prosecutor's office to get trial experience, and then they transition to a civil law firm because obviously you have the ability to make more money in private civil practice. And so what he said is true, that my career projection was kind of backwards from many different careers. But I can tell you kind of how it happened is, we talked about my first love was always criminal, and I loved the firm. I loved working there. I loved the people. But after working there for a couple of years, if somebody were to ask me, well, what is your long-term goal? I would not have been able to say that, well, my long-term goal is to be a partner at a law firm. And when you're at a law firm, that is the long-term goal. And so fortunately for me, I had a mentor there who had been a long-time prosecutor here in Cobb County. She had been a long-time felony prosecutor, and her and I worked on a couple of cases together at the firm. And when I was telling her, I don't think my long-term career goal is to be a partner at a law firm, she said, you should go to the courthouse. You should go to the courthouse because you go to the courthouse, you'll learn how to try cases, you meet the other lawyers in the community, and you'll meet the judges, and you'll have a great experience. You need to go to the courthouse and learn how to be a lawyer. And I said, well, how am I going to do that? And so she was able to set up an interview with the elected Solicitor General, and I was able to meet with the elected Solicitor General, but at that time he didn't have any jobs available. And it was a wonderful interview, and he said, oh, we'll keep you in mind if we ever have anything come open. And so I didn't hear anything, and I wasn't sure I would ever hear anything. And like I said, I loved the people I was working with. I loved the subject matter. I loved working with the school boards, and so I wasn't in any big rush. But then relatively quickly, I can't remember, it was a matter of just a few weeks or maybe a month or two, I did get a call from the solicitor's office. And they said that they enjoyed the interview, they have a position open in traffic court, and we would love for you to come. And of course, at that point, the theory of going to the courthouse, it got real quick, and it meant a substantial pay cut, in the range of 30% or more. I mean, a substantial pay cut. And so fortunately, I was in the position, I was married at that time, my wife and I talked it over, and she said, if this is what you want to do, you think this is what you want to do long term, and this is what is best for your career, then absolutely, we'll support it, we'll figure it out, we'll make it happen. And so I was able to say yes to that opportunity to come here to the courthouse. And my first job at the solicitor's office, they would, especially at that time, they would start out everybody in traffic court. And so it was a very humbling experience because I had been a lawyer for 2 years. Of course, a 2-year lawyer doesn't, a 2-year lawyer thinks they know everything, but a 2-year lawyer is still learning. But I had learned a lot, and I'd appeared in federal court, and I'd appeared in different superior courts in the metro Atlanta area, and I had advised elected officials. I had appeared at the appellate courts and things of that nature. And so you felt like you really, you were on your way. And then all of a sudden now you're in traffic court, which is the most basic court. But I couldn't really have asked for a better experience because I always joke that if I ever write a biography, I'm not sure who would read it, but if I wrote it, my biography would be named "Everything I Needed to Learn in Life I Learned in Traffic Court," because it's true. You learn how to think on your feet. You learn how to try a case. You learn how to work with other lawyers. You learn how to work with unrepresented parties. You learn how to work with a judge. All the judges are different. You learn how to research the law. And working in traffic court is just a wonderful, vibrant experience. You are in court literally every single day. And so lawyers, even lawyers that specialize in civil litigation, would tell you sometimes they would die for that opportunity because they love to be in court, but so much of their work is motions work, doing research and depositions and writing motions and responding to motions. And so it's such a special opportunity to get to put on a suit every day and come into court and actually be present in the courtroom and learn and practice as a lawyer in that way. So I loved the transition to traffic court. It was great. And then the way the career progression at the solicitor's office worked was when there was an opening in the jury trial division, then they would kind of take whoever was ready. It was almost like being in the minor leagues and getting called up to the big leagues is kind of how we thought of it. And so I think within a few months, it was less than a year, I know, because I like to brag about that. So I know it's on my materials. I always joke about that. Sometime less than a year, I was able to get called up, so to speak, and I went to what we call Division I here in Cobb County. And Division I, it's just like football. Division I is the full jury trial division of our state court, where you're handling more than the traffic cases. You're now handling any kind of misdemeanors, and of course, the most significant being domestic violence and also being DUIs. And so I was able to learn in Division I again. Now you're not only learning how to try a case, you're learning how to try a case to a jury, which is a very different and specific skill set. And it's a special opportunity to be able to do that in a misdemeanor setting where the stakes can be a little bit lower as you are continuing to learn and develop your skills. And it's just like anything in life. It's just like exercise or whatever else. You need a lot of reps to get better, right? And so I can remember there was 1 week when I was in Division I as a misdemeanor prosecutor, and I tried 3 jury trials in 1 week, which sounds kind of crazy, but they were traffic jury trials, but nonetheless they were jury trials because in Georgia, for many of the traffic charges, folks have a right to a jury trial. And so there was somebody that was insistent on his right to a jury trial, and so we gave him his jury trial one after another. I remember picking one jury while the other jury was still deliberating. And so the experience like that is just so wonderful. And then I also was able to gain a particular interest in and skill in domestic violence cases. Domestic violence may start off as a misdemeanor, but it can very quickly escalate into a felony or even a murder case. Domestic violence affects Georgians of every socioeconomic level, every gender, every race, every religion, every ethnicity. It is not a problem unique to any one community. And so I gained a great appreciation for and interest in working in the domestic violence field and helping survivors of domestic violence. And so I was very fortunate to do that at the solicitor's office and made lifelong friends there now. There are several of us now that were in the office together as misdemeanor prosecutors who are now judges in Cobb County. And so it was just a great experience working together and working for the people of this community, and learning and growing. And so I loved my experience at the solicitor's office. In some ways, it came full circle. As chief magistrate, I'm sure we'll talk about later, one of my jobs is to appoint other judges. And so the boss that took a chance on me, who hired me from civil practice, the elected solicitor, is named Barry Morgan. And when he retired as the elected solicitor, he came to me and he said, I want to go to magistrate court, and I'd already been over here for a few years. And he said that one of his first jobs in the law, Barry had been an educator, and then he went back to law school later in life, and one of his first jobs was as a part-time magistrate judge. And he said he wanted to return to the beginning and become a part-time magistrate judge again. And he asked, would I have him? And so we had our interview, and I said, absolutely. He's extremely knowledgeable and a great person, and now he's a great judge. And so my very first boss at the courthouse now works for me, full circle. So it just shows you, in the legal profession and in so many things, it's all about relationships. Relationships are so important. And so, for instance, when I left the law firm, I left on very good terms because, like I said, I had nothing but respect and admiration for the lawyers that I worked with. It was just that wasn't my long-term career goal. And so those very same lawyers serve on my campaign committee now and help me when it comes to election time. And so it's a small legal community. At the end of the day, even though I think Georgia has something like 50,000 lawyers now, it's still a small legal community where people know each other and have respect for each other and work together. So it was a great experience at the solicitor's office. Again, learning you would really take on a lot of tasks. I worked in like I said, I developed that interest and somewhat expertise in domestic violence cases. And so they ended up giving me the domestic violence court program to work on. And that was a program in addition to my courtroom responsibilities, where we were working with low-level and first-time domestic violence offenders to provide them treatment and counseling so that they would not reoffend again through a diversion program. So it was a great experience as a misdemeanor prosecutor.
That's awesome. And then I saw that you ran as a candidate for Cobb County State Court Judge 2015 to 2016. So what did that 7-month election campaign look like?
Sure. So it was a great experience. By that time, I had moved over to the district attorney's office. That same mentor who had got me the interview with the solicitor's office, she had been a long-term felony prosecutor. She had been at the district attorney's office. And she had suggested that I continue challenging myself and apply at the district attorney's office. And so I applied a few times. Life is not always a straight line. You don't always get what you want when you want it. But I applied a few times at the district attorney's office and ultimately made that transition to the DA's office. So I had increased responsibility. Now I'm responsible for a felony caseload and trying felony cases to a jury in Superior Court. It was a great experience. And so then for the 2016 election, there were several judgeships that came open. And so I decided to run for one of the open state court seats. And state court in Georgia handles misdemeanor crimes and civil litigation without respect to a monetary limit. So some of the biggest civil cases in the state of Georgia run through state court. And so I decided to run in that open election for state court, and it was a great experience. I always say, really, especially for those that want to serve as judges, it's a great experience to run because you learn more about the community that you are serving, I think, than in any other way. You tend to fall into patterns unless you're forced out of your pattern. I live in one area of the county and I work in one area of the county. And so I kind of go back and forth between home and work, and I have my friends at home and my friends at work. But they're all, this is a county of almost 800,000 people, and we're elected to serve the entire community. And so one way to get to know an entire community real quick is by an election. And so it was a wonderful experience. I would say the goal during the election was always you would try to go to one event for breakfast, one event for lunch, and at least 2 in the evening. So you were constantly on the go. Not only we were doing all of those events, and then you were having fundraisers, you were putting up yard signs, We even knocked on doors. My wife and I went door to door. And so campaign was an extremely busy and wonderful experience. At the end of the day, we came up a little short in that election. I was only, I guess we could do the math, but I was in my 30s. It was young. When I look back on the mail pieces from the campaign, I kind of look like a baby. And sometimes people think of, when they think of a judge, they might think of somebody older. But my argument was, hey, I've got the experience. I'm ready to hit the ground running. I'm in my active working time, and let's go. But at the end of the day, I came up a little bit short. I came in second place in a 3-person race. And I always joke that in an election, when you come in second place, nobody gives you a silver medal. You just lose. But that's not entirely true, because I ran a great race, and I made a lot of good connections, and people watch how you conduct an election. In our election, I ran an entirely positive campaign. So my campaign was all about my experience and how I would conduct myself as a judge in Cobb County, following the law, working hard, being tough but fair, all of those things, and not wasting time and wasting money and wasting ink and energy on the other people in the race. Mine was a positive race, talking about myself, my experience, and how I would adhere to the rule of law as a judge. And so because of that, when the opportunity came for appointment to the position that I'm honored to hold now, the way I ran that race helped lead to me ultimately being appointed as the chief magistrate, because a chief magistrate position is a little bit different than some other judgeships. If there is a vacancy midterm in the chief magistrate, it's not the governor that appoints. Most judgeships, if it's a state or superior court and the judge retires early or passes away during their elected term, the governor of the state is the one that appoints the new judge, and then the new judge runs for election. Well, if there's a vacancy in the office of chief magistrate, it's actually the local superior court judges that appoint the new chief magistrate, and then that person has to run. And so I was very fortunate when the chief magistrate position opened up. The incumbent was appointed to be the district attorney, and so it opened up the position midterm, and I was at the DA's office, and people knew I had, and they knew whoever they appointed would have to turn around and run very quickly. And so I think part of what helped me to be appointed over here was the superior court judges had seen that I had the capability, the know-how, and the energy to run a countywide campaign. And so that was great. It was also, some things are sometimes, opportunities are all about timing sometimes. And at that time, DAs are generally assigned to one courtroom at a time. And so I had actually been assigned in Superior Court to 3 different courtrooms in front of 3 different Superior Court judges. And I had done, I like to think I did a good job in each of those courtrooms. And so when it came time for the appointment, at that time there were 10 Superior Court judges in Cobb County. So when you think about an appointment from 10 Superior Court judges, essentially it's an election of 10 people instead of an election of 800,000 people. So you really just needed 6 votes. And so I like to think that doing well in 3 different courtrooms gave me a head start in that process of appointment, because there were 3 judges that were directly familiar with the work that I could do. And so that was, again, that wasn't through my own doing. I just ran with the opportunities I was given, because it's the district attorney decides when and where you are to be assigned. You're going to be in courtroom A, and well, now we need you in courtroom B for whatever reason. And so I was able to take the most of those opportunities and run with them. So I think part of that part is kind of fortunate, and then also the part of nothing is wasted. That even though I came up short in that election, the conduct of that election undoubtedly assisted me into being appointed to the position that I hold now.
That's awesome. Now, going into how you were assistant district attorney, then promoted to senior assistant district attorney for Cobb Judicial Circuit. So you prosecuted felonies in the Superior Court of Cobb County 2013 to 2019, such as murder, armed robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, and drug trafficking. So tell me more about your experiences in those positions, and then I am particularly interested in your experiences prosecuting drug trafficking, and if you dealt with cases that were about prescription drug trafficking and opioid overdoses.
Yeah, that's a lot of questions in one question. So at the DA's office, the way it typically works is there are 2 prosecutors assigned per courtroom, and you take all the cases, you divide up the cases by the defendant's last name, and one prosecutor takes half the cases alphabetically, the other prosecutor takes the other half, and you are responsible for your half of the cases from beginning to end. So making the charging decision, drafting the indictment, handling the discovery and pretrial motions, handling the jury trial, sometimes handling the initial motion for new trial, the initial appeal, handling potential probation violations. So you kind of do it from beginning to end. And then you help each other during the jury trials. You kind of try the cases together. One person takes the lead if it's your case versus your partner's case. And then that way you see all kinds of cases. Now, in a large metro Atlanta DA's office like here in Cobb, there are also specialty units. So you would have a specialty unit that would handle some of the more complex murder cases or the complex SVU cases, gang cases, cases like that. But for the most part, then you would get to try, any kind of case. And so it was great experience getting to try cases, routinely felony cases, and doing good works for victims of crime. Another opportunity I had at the DA's office that I was very proud of, accountability courts in Cobb County are very strong. There's a drug court, a mental health court, a veterans court, and those specialty courts essentially are trying to handle felony criminal cases in a new way. It's, we say new, but it's been around for 20, 30 years at this point, and the idea is attacking the root causes of some crimes and to prevent recidivism. If this crime was, caused by undiagnosed or untreated mental health, then if we can get that person integrated into mental health treatment and prevent future recidivism, then that's a win for everybody involved. And so I was able to serve as kind of the backup prosecutor to the main, fully assigned prosecutor. So whenever that person was not available to cover a certain accountability court, I would go. And so I learned a tremendous amount about how that process works, and really I took some of those principles and imported them even into my own caseload of, hey, what is driving this criminal case? What has brought us to this point, and how can we address it so that not only is justice done, not only is the victim made whole, but we prevent something like this from happening again. It's really the most cost-effective way to address crime as well for the taxpayer. It's much more taxpayer friendly to actually address problems instead of trying to lock up our way out of problems. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain crimes where there is no fixing it going forward, that sometimes people need to be punished and they need to be incarcerated, and that's what we would do in those cases. But in other cases, nonviolent cases, property crime, where addressing the root cause could help make a difference, then I was committed to doing that. It was a great experience. Answering the questions about drug trafficking and opioid overdoses, sometimes it can be hard for us to remember anecdotes. Sometimes if we're at a party and you get me talking, maybe I'll start remembering funny stories and anecdotes, but I think those of us that work in criminal law, it's almost like a coping mechanism, that we work hard on our case, and then we try our case, and then we forget about our case, because you need to be prepared for the next case, and you don't want to carry all of the heavy emotions of these very serious cases with you. But I can tell you, when you speak about opioid overdoses, there's one case that I will never, I'll never forget, and that is I had a simple drug possession case. And so a simple drug possession case is the defendant is accused of possessing a small amount of drugs, and it was heroin, which is an opioid. And so on a case like that is fairly routine, where if the person decides to plead guilty, then generally speaking, the person is going to get probation for possessing a small amount of drugs. They're going to go on probation, have drug screens, have an evaluation and treatment, but they're generally speaking not going to go to prison. And there is no victim in a simple drug possession case like there would be on a theft case or a shooting or an armed robbery. On the victim cases, it's very victim intensive. You want to get victim input, understand if they have restitution needs, understanding their safety needs, and so you work very closely with victims in victim cases. But in a simple drug possession, there is no victim, and so you generally just kind of discuss the case with the defendant's attorney, and you work out some kind of negotiated guilty plea generally. Well, I can remember this particular case. I got a call from a family, and the family said, we have a particular interest in this simple drug possession case because our daughter died of an opioid overdose in this defendant's home, and we are convinced that he supplied the drugs to our daughter, and that he's supplying the drugs to other young people. And at that time, that wasn't necessarily a specific crime. Since then, the Georgia General Assembly has adopted specific criminal statutes that deal with that exact situation. And so, I turned that information over to law enforcement. They investigate. There was not enough evidence to bring any kind of enhanced charge in that case. So we prosecuted the case through the normal channels, but taking it seriously, keeping the family informed who had called in. And I remember one thing that struck me about that case was at that time, my first child was a baby. And, when you have a baby, you want to take the baby on a walk, right? My wife and I would be pushing the little stroller, and we had this little route that we would take in our neighborhood. And our neighborhood is generally, we live in a safe part of the county that's known as being very safe. All of Cobb County is very safe, but our area is known as particularly safe. And I remember in handling that case where it was simple drug possession, but the young person had died in the home from an opioid overdose, that house where that young woman lost her life from opioids, I passed that house every time I walked my child in their stroller. And that really impressed upon me that the opioid epidemic it's not another person problem. It's not a problem of a certain socioeconomic, certain race, certain ethnicity, certain part of the county. The opioid epidemic is everywhere, everyone, at any time. And so that case, I just will never forget that case. And they were very thankful for us listening to them and taking it seriously, and stayed in touch with us. But that case really impressed upon me that this is a community-wide problem that needs kind of a community-wide answer for sure. It's very, opioids especially, it's very difficult it can be difficult to address because some folks are abusing prescription medication, right? That when somebody's in crisis and they're using methamphetamine that they've got off the street in the back of a car, many of those folks understand that they are struggling with a substance abuse problem, and that they need help. Sometimes folks, when they have a problem with an opioid, and it's an opioid that's been prescribed to them, maybe from a pill mill or something like that, but it can be hard for folks at first to realize that they are also struggling because they think, oh, this is medicine, this is a prescription drug, it's been given to me by a doctor and a pharmacist. But if that doctor and pharmacist is not doing right by their patient and really just operating a pill mill, then the person using the opioid can be struggling and not even know it. So those are particularly difficult cases to work on for sure.
I actually read American Pain. So it was a book about a Florida pill mill, essentially, that primarily dealt with opioids. And then I also read Pain Brokers recently. That dropped a few months ago. That was written by a UGA law professor. But, I mean, it's very crazy to actually sit there and read, and just about how, some people that are in the medical profession, there's a certain amount of money at stake, and, they might turn a blind eye, if not, even if they do or do not know exactly like what's going on in said pill mill. But it's very sad. It was American Pain was really insightful though, because it also deals with whenever we have like cracks in regulations, how a lot of the times like they're still like registered businesses on paper, like they're not operating underground. Like it's a visible clinic that serves like hundreds of patients, that has doctors and all these things. So it was very interesting. It ran between 2008 and 2010. So now going into your current role as the Chief Magistrate Judge that you've held since 2019. So one of the focuses on this podcast when I'm talking to leaders is just asking how they lead. So you lead a 90-member court staff team that includes appointed magistrate judges, clerk's office, pretrial services, mediation, and administration. So throughout your career, or particularly in this role, what are things that have really stood out to you that are main principles of your leadership style, things that may specifically be useful when leading in law versus generally?
Yes, you asked a great question about lawyers and leadership, and earlier we talked about law school and kind of emphasized how law school teaches very bright people how to think, research, and communicate in a new way. One thing law school generally doesn't teach is how to be a leader. It's not management school, anything like that. And all throughout my career, I was mainly in the prosecutor's offices. The prosecutor is an informal leader of a trial team, right? The trial team would consist of a judicial assistant, a victim witness advocate, an investigator, but in a very real sense, the prosecutor was not the manager of those folks. Those folks all would report up through a different chain of command to a chief investigator, a chief victim witness advocate, etc. And so when I came to the magistrate court, at that time it was a team of about 75 people. I had never managed even one person. And so I was learning on the fly. And so fortunately for me, I had examples of strong lawyer leaders throughout my career. The elected district attorney who's now a Superior Court Judge, Vic Reynolds, and I mentioned the elected solicitor, Barry Morgan, partner at a law firm, Clem Doyle, all of these very strong lawyer leaders. And so one of the things that was evident to me from those leaders is the importance of communication. And so I try as Chief Magistrate to communicate clearly and communicate often, both internally with our own folks and externally with the people we serve, with members of the bar and members of the public, so that we can clearly communicate and emphasize what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it, and not assuming that people are going to get that information if it's just mentioned on one web page or mentioned one time on a social media post from the county. Just repeatedly communicating a clear and consistent message, and also being available, listening both internally and externally to what it is people need and what their experience is so that we can serve them better. part of communicating also showed me the importance of building and relying on a strong team. It's not worth having a team of 90 people if you don't empower and entrust them to do their job. And so, for instance, when I got here, I had primarily worked in criminal law. I didn't know anything about eviction cases. And this court presides over approximately 20,000 eviction cases a year. It's a very important aspect of what we do. It's very sensitive. A tenant may lose their home. A landlord may be missing out on rent that they need to make their own mortgage, to make sure that they are not foreclosed upon or evicted ultimately. And so a good leader understands what they know, what they don't know, and builds a team of more strong leaders to help fill in the gaps, empowers them and entrusts them to do their job. And so I can remember also starting out, I knew I wanted to communicate, and I wanted to communicate effectively. But I remember at one point, one of my top leaders in our clerk's office pulled me aside and said, the clerks don't need to know this, what I had just told them. The clerks need to know that, what she believed I should be telling them about the same topic of whatever we were working on. And that was very eye-opening because I was approaching the topic from a lawyer's perspective. What, as an assistant district attorney, would I have wanted to know about whatever this subject is? And that chief clerk helped me to understand it's good to communicate. You're doing the right thing by communicating clearly and often, but what you're communicating sometimes might need to change based on the audience. And so that was very eye-opening. And again, I relied on that person's advice and that person's counsel because there's somebody whose opinion and experience that I greatly respect. A lawyer leader also needs to be constantly a lifelong learner, a continuous education is not just something that you meet the mandatory, it is something that you're doing every day, so that you make sure that your practice or your court or whatever it may be is on top of current trends in the law and current requirements of the law. And so I think that's an important aspect of being a leader. Leading from the front is important, making sure that you are present, accessible, that you're not asking people to do something you're not willing to do yourself. And so an example of that is really, when I got here, when I was first initially appointed, it was only 8 months before the entire world shut down for COVID in 2020. I was appointed in July of 19, and of course the whole world shut down in March of 2020. And so at that time, not only was I learning how to be a judge inside the courtroom, I was also learning how to be a court leader of our entire court, and then the whole world changed. And so part of my leadership style, because of when I came in and the circumstances that I entered under, was really an emergency leadership style, that I essentially entered in an emergency time. What is essential? How are we going to continue the essentials? How are we going to keep people safe, both the people we serve and the people that work here? And it would constantly change. There would be a new mandate from the federal government that would say, you can handle eviction cases in this way. And then a court decision would say, no, you don't have to do that. And then it would change, and it would change again. And so you were constantly having to adapt both to the legal framework and to the public health framework. And so kind of that initial leadership experience of being a leader in an emergency undoubtedly colors how I'm a leader today, even years later. But I think it's important to regularize structures and procedures. You can't always operate in an emergency mode. You really need to be in a strategic mode, in a long-term mode. And so that's what, from the COVID period to present, we've been working on, is making sure that we're not just putting out fire after fire, but rather looking at the long term, looking at the horizon, where do we want to go and how can we get there? And for this court, the answer is always access to justice. For a magistrate court is known as the people's court. This is where regular folks, small businesses and families can come without complicated procedures, complicated rules, or complicated timelines and have So our entire mission needs to be make it easier for regular folks, small businesses, and families to have their day in court. Not necessarily to have their way. They may lose, but they need to be heard. They need to be heard in a timely and professional manner. And so that's what we're working on as a court leader now, is always access to justice and really coming out of COVID emergency mode, which is let's just keep this ship afloat and make sure that we are continuing to operate as we need to statutorily to how can we do our statutory duties, but how can we do them even better to make sure people have access to justice? During the COVID period, this court did not have the luxury of closing. But so much of what we do was deemed by the judicial system to be an essential function. So for instance, if an individual is incarcerated pre-trial, they have to have an opportunity to be heard as to bond, so that because the Constitution says if they meet certain factors, they need to be released and wait for their jury trial in the community. And so we were always having first appearance hearings and preliminary hearings and bond hearings. We assist the Superior Court in domestic violence protective orders. That's something that could not stop during the pandemic. Domestic violence did not stop during the pandemic. In many ways, it got worse. And so, again, we had to continue, we had to find a way to do those hearings in a safe manner that kept the public safe and kept the people that work here safe, but had to keep the justice system rolling forward. And so I think that definitely informs my leadership style today. But for lawyers, sometimes it is a difficult transition because you are so focused on thinking like a lawyer, and as you transition into a leadership role, you need to think not only like a lawyer, but also like a leader.
That's awesome. Perfect. And then also, you were concurrently appointed annually to assist the Superior Court of Cobb County with matters reserved to their jurisdiction, such as jury trials, pleas, family and dating violence, and temporary protective orders, as well as bond. So can you talk about how those roles differed?
Sure. And so my core job, I serve as the elected chief magistrate judge. And so Georgia law gives jurisdiction to magistrate judges over certain legal matters. And so, for instance, that includes considering and issuing search and arrest warrants, holding the first 3 hearings in any criminal case, first appearance, preliminary hearing, bond hearing. We also handle ordinance violations, which are low-level criminal offenses created by county code. That's what we do on the criminal side of our court. And then on the civil side of our court, we handle, as we mentioned, eviction cases, which this court handles about $20,000 a year. We also handle small claims cases, about another $20,000 a year. And those cases are cases that don't require equity jurisdiction. So that means money can fix the problem after the problem has already occurred. So a magistrate judge doesn't have the authority to order somebody to do something like move the fence because the fence is on your neighbor's property, but we have the authority to say we're going to award you a judgment to move the fence yourself because the neighbor has caused you this damage by the fence being on your property, that kind of thing. We also do a lot of credit card debt cases under that umbrella. So magistrate court has our own unique civil and criminal jurisdiction. The Superior Court has their own unique civil and criminal jurisdiction. In Georgia, the Superior Court is considered the court of general jurisdiction. So they essentially have jurisdiction to do anything a local court can do without restriction. And so part of being a leader is also not being siloed. I think I saw this as the title of one of your other podcasts with somebody, maybe in the healthcare setting or a different setting. So we try to do the same thing. Even though I have my statutory responsibility, in order to have an efficient justice system, leaders need to work together. And so part of working together in Cobb County is the Superior Court on an annual basis shares some of their authority with me so that I can complete some tasks that fall under their umbrella because it would be more efficient because of the way our court runs for me to do it. So for instance, under Georgia law, there are certain crimes that Georgia law says only a superior court judge can consider whether the person accused of that crime should be released pending his or her trial. So those are called bond hearings or bail hearings, you may hear them called. So you can imagine we do lots and lots of bail hearings because bail hearings happen in magistrate court. So the superior court said, well, we trust your judgment, and so Georgia law also allows us to appoint you on an assisting basis, and so we're going to appoint you on an assisting basis to handle the bond hearings that would normally be reserved to the superior court in magistrate court, because it's more efficient to do so because you're already routinely hearing bond hearings. Another example is the domestic violence protective orders. Because the domestic violence protective orders and the stalking and the dating violence protective orders as well have a very fast statutory deadline, magistrate court is used to fast statutory deadlines. We handle that in eviction cases, we handle that in first appearance cases. Superior court is really built for the long term. Big cases that take a longer time to go through. They may have several hearings and then a jury trial. And so it was decided it would be more efficient for us to handle the domestic violence cases, the protective order cases here. And that's very common in Metro Atlanta, so we assist in that way. In the 90s, it was also decided there were lots of big drug trafficking cases. And so it was decided that any case made by the law enforcement unit in Cobb County that was focused on drug trafficking would be assigned to the chief magistrate, and the chief magistrate would handle the case all the way through jury trial. That was decided because a lot of those cases are cumbersome. They might have 20 co-defendants. And if one of those cases hits a superior court judge's calendar, it might really bog down that superior court judge's calendar when that superior court judge is also hearing murder cases and armed robbery cases and SVU cases, which are typically more like one defendant or a couple of defendants. So if they could bundle up these 20 co-defendant cases, assign them into one courtroom, it would be more efficient. And so that's how, same thing with pleas. Sometimes early on in the process, when we're at one of our preliminary magistrate court hearings, the accused may determine, you know what, I actually want to resolve this case very early on. I know that there's no motion to suppress here, there's really no issue for the jury. I want to take responsibility, I want to plead guilty, and I want to move on with my life. So again, the superior court says, you know what, why don't y'all handle some of those matters for us, so that those low-level offenses that can be resolved very easily never even hit our superior court docket, so that the superior court judges can be focused on the complex criminal litigation, complex family law litigation, matters of equity that are exclusive to their jurisdiction, and other important cases for the whole community. So that's how that works, is essentially the elected chief magistrate and the other full-time magistrate judges are appointed on an annual basis to help make our system more efficient by sharing the authority of the superior court.
Awesome. And then during COVID, you were a member of the Chief Justice's Judicial COVID-19 Task Force. So can you talk a bit about that unique role?
Yeah, and again, sometimes, like I mentioned, opportunities come because of timing. I was a baby judge, a brand new chief magistrate, and one day I got a call from the statewide president of our organization, the Council of Magistrate Court Judges, and he said, hey, the Chief Justice is convening a task force for COVID. It seems like it's mainly going to be focused on how to handle jury trials, and since you're the newest magistrate, that means you're the most recent to have tried a jury trial, because I came out of the DA's office, so why don't you do it? And I said, sure, I'd be glad to. And it was a great opportunity. Then Chief Justice Harold Melton, who is from Cobb County, I'm very proud, was an excellent lawyer leader, an excellent leader of our judicial system statewide. Georgia judges and Georgia courts did not run and hide from the program. Georgia judges and lawyers did not run and hide from COVID. We tackled it head on. And so the task force would routinely meet, and it was judges from all classes of court and lawyers from all over the state would meet to discuss what is the problem with COVID, what is the current public health guidance, what are the essential functions of the judicial system, and how can we keep the essential justice system functions running while making sure the public that we serve, the lawyers that appear here, and our court staff all remain safe. And it was, for a very trying time, obviously COVID was a trying time for everyone. The court system is no exception. It was a wonderful experience to get to work with experienced judges and lawyers from all over the state to make this court system for the people of Georgia continue to run. And we were very fortunate that in Cobb and in Georgia, we did not experience some of the backlogs that they did in other areas of the country because of the leadership of Chief Justice Melton and others that kept us focused and moving forward even during the COVID period. So that was a very special opportunity, early in my judicial career.
Awesome. And then you partnered with the Cobb County Board of Commissioners and invited local nonprofit organizations to the courthouse. This ensured that over $50 million in federal emergency rental assistance funding was able to reach those in need. So talk a bit more about how that partnership came about and working with it.
Sure. So it's a little bit, if I back up a little bit from before COVID, we kind of talked about how I had, been fortunate to work in criminal cases in accountability courts and attacking the root cause of crime and addressing it. And so even before COVID, I had met with a community partner, a nonprofit partner, that had a similar idea about eviction cases. Now, eviction cases are not crimes. The folks that are in eviction court are not committing a crime because they have fallen behind on their rent. And folks find themselves in eviction court for any number of reasons. But sometimes the reasons that folks find themselves in eviction court can be addressed through case management and intervention. And so we had before COVID, we had this idea of, what if we brought short-term rental assistance together with case management? Case management is things like resume building, financial literacy, budgeting, job skills, job fairs. What if we brought these things together so that folks could have better employment opportunities and be able to afford their rent? So we had this kind of seed of an idea, and then that seed of an idea was interrupted by COVID, because during COVID, the federal government had decided to make rental assistance money widely available all across the country. And the COVID focus was not, how can we have this financial intervention like a laser focusing on this family and how to get this family self-sufficient and standing on their own 2 feet in the future. Rather, the emergency rental assistance funding was designed to go as wide and as far as possible, as quickly as possible. Because the idea was, during a global health pandemic, you did not want tenants displaced from their home because that would continue to spread the disease. And you did not want landlords to be insolvent. You did not want landlords not receiving payment during the pandemic when some tenants could not work. And so the federal government decided that emergency rental assistance would solve both sides of the problem. You would keep tenants housed and you would keep landlords solvent. So when these ideas were being discussed federally, the decision that was made was, in large communities like ours, there would be direct grants made to the county government. And so Cobb County government received these various federal funds. And I can remember at some early meetings where this was being discussed, and each community was given leeway to decide how to set up their program. And again, that would be determined by the elected leaders in the political branch. For us, the Board of Commissioners. And there was discussion of, well, how will we know who needs help and how will we get them help? And I kind of raised my hand and I said, I know who needs help because the eviction filings are in our court, and people that have an eviction filing in our court are the folks most in immediate danger of, on the tenant side, being evicted, and on the landlord side, being insolvent. And so we were able to build a program where the political branch decided it was best to choose multiple nonprofit providers, which ended up being a very good idea, because different people in different geographic areas of the county know to go to different nonprofits when they are struggling or they're in trouble. And so it was smart to break it up into different nonprofits. And what we did was we partnered with the nonprofits and we said, come to the courthouse. So in one courtroom, we had the actual hearings going on. And in one courtroom, it became a mini social services agency where the nonprofits would be present so that they could screen candidates to see if they qualified for the emergency rental assistance funding, and they could quickly process those applications. And then our clerks, we had grant-funded clerks, would serve as an intermediary between the landlord and the tenant, because the emergency rental assistance was always a voluntary program. The landlord would decide if they want to participate in the program. If they did and the tenant qualified, the landlord would get the funding directly from the nonprofit. But what was happening in some areas of the country is the emergency rental assistance program was taking too long. So the landlords in those communities did not want to participate because they were not seeing the money actually come through. So by our clerk's office serving as an intermediary saying, here's the information, nonprofit, that you need to process the application quickly, and hey, landlord, here's what's going on with the case. It's only a week or two until it will be processed, or this one will take a month. Having, again, that clear communication gave the landlords confidence to participate in the program. And so that is what made our program successful. Inviting the nonprofits to the courthouse and then having that link between the landlords, the tenants, and the nonprofit community so that everybody had confidence in the program. So our program was very efficient in getting the funding out without fraud occurring. Because obviously if you move too fast, you could have fraud because you're not making sure that people are eligible for the program or doing what they need to do for the program. But our program struck that balance between moving very quickly, getting the money where it needed to go without fraud being present. So we were very proud of that, that emergency assistance during the pandemic, because we were able to assist numerous families during that time. But again, it was that emergency leadership. It was a once in a generation amount of funding available. This emergency rental assistance, and then no one had ever done this kind of thing before. So each community was building it out for themselves in different ways, and there was no playbook to figure out. You just had to get together, communicate, research, learn, and be willing to try something. I thought about it because the role of a court is a fair and impartial arbiter of disputes, right? I'm not for one side or the other. My job is to have a forum where people can be heard and I can decide cases under the law. I thought about this program as essentially mediation with money, is what we would call it. For years and years and years, courts have invited parties to participate in mediation, where when there's a dispute filed, a trained mediator can discuss the case with both parties and help the parties resolve the case for themselves without the judge having to decide it for them. Well, this was very similar to mediation. It says, hey, landlords, tenants, here's a way to resolve your case with this federal funding. If you're interested, we'll bring you together, we'll help facilitate it. If you're not, we'll just have a hearing like normal. And so I found it to be a very natural role. It was certainly a new role for courts, but a very natural role when you really unpack it and think about what it is that we were doing. We were just helping people resolve a dispute with the resources that we had on hand.
Gotcha. Awesome. And then finally, I wanted to ask about your experience as a member of the Supreme Court Study Committee on Legal Regulatory Reform.
Yes, that committee certainly has a name that only a lawyer could love, because it's hard to tell what the committee is just from reading the title. But I was very honored by then Chief Justice Boggs asked me to join the committee. What that committee was focused on, Chief Justice Boggs is from South Georgia, and all across the state, not only in South Georgia, but in areas here in Metro Atlanta, there's actually a lawyer shortage. We discussed that there are 50,000 lawyers in the state, but there are still some counties in Georgia where there is not even one lawyer that lives or practices in the county. And this is not a unique problem to Georgia. This is a nationwide problem where qualified lawyers need to be attracted to communities all across the state to make sure that legal needs are met. And so what other communities have done across the nation that Justice Boggs knew was they have approved programs where non-lawyers could provide limited legal assistance in certain types of cases in order to help increase access to justice where lawyers were not currently able to serve clients, either because they're not present or it was not financially viable to do so. So this study committee got together judges and lawyers from all over the state, all different practice areas, to discuss the scope of the problem in Georgia and then work with experts to build a pilot program that could help resolve the issue. Magistrate court was extremely important in this endeavor because we serve in magistrate court so many folks that cannot afford to hire a lawyer. You're probably thinking, you might think of the police shows on TV, right? When somebody's arrested, they read the Miranda rights and they say, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to a lawyer. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed for you. And that is true in a criminal case, right? In a criminal case, folks have a constitutional right to counsel, and if the folks cannot afford an attorney, the court will appoint one for them. But in civil cases, that is not true, and there are lots of important civil cases. We've discussed eviction cases, there are credit card debt cases, there are family law cases, there are juvenile court cases. People's children could be put into foster care. People may not have a right to visit with their children. People may be ordered to pay child support or may face a contempt action because they're not paying their child support. There are all kinds of important civil cases where the right to counsel is not guaranteed. And so the Supreme Court wanted to figure out how to fund the gaps. Ultimately, the report that the committee issued said, let's start in magistrate court. Let's start with eviction cases. Let's start with credit card debt cases, because these are cases that essentially lawyers are not practicing in this area right now. So it's not like lawyers are being displaced. Instead, having somebody step in to provide limited legal assistance would actually supplement and assist lawyers in their practice and increase access to justice. So the report calls on the Supreme Court to consider limited legal practitioners. It would be folks in government and nonprofit organizations that have certain qualifications, training, and regulation to provide approved, limited scope legal representation to clients under the direction of a lawyer only in certain areas. And so the Supreme Court right now is considering that pilot program, and then if they issue that pilot program and approve it, then certain counties across the state would be authorized to begin implementing that to see how that works. And it's been done in a variety of states already and had great success. And so we look forward to the Supreme Court making a decision on that report.
What were those professionals called again?
Our report called them limited legal practitioners. They have different names in different states. I think some places call them legal navigators. I can't remember all the different names they had, but you can imagine lawyers, there was a debate even about what to call the folks. And so there was lots of good, vigorous conversation. And I believe the idea was it's kind of like a nurse practitioner. A limited legal practitioner was the idea.
Awesome. Do you know how these programs are in other states? How long this kind of approach to expanding access to justice has been in other states? And then were there certain states that were like models for the committee to look at?
There definitely were. I know Texas had gone into this, Alaska had gone into this, and really the models varied widely based on the state and the unique state's need and that legal community's desire to address the problem in a certain way. So for instance, some of the pilot programs only allowed the limited legal practitioner or the legal navigator to provide advice outside of court. So for instance, what that would look like is in a typical eviction case, the landlord files a complaint, and then the tenant in Georgia has to file an answer within 7 days. It's a very quick turnaround. A typical answer period for other types of civil cases is 30 days. So in the most limited model, the limited practitioner would be able to give advice to the tenant on how to fill out the answer form, what possible defenses the tenant would have, what possible motions the tenant could file, and how the tenant could conduct the hearing on their own. Other models that seemed to be too big, to implement immediately would actually allow the limited legal practitioner to speak on behalf of somebody else in court. The committee did not favor that approach because that would require a lot more training and supervision of the limited legal practitioners. We felt like investing in that pre-hearing legal advice and legal information could yield a lot more fruit a lot more quickly because there aren't the same risks and challenges involved as somebody actually standing up for somebody in court and representing them. But yes, the system, I'd invite you to read the report. It's a great report available on the Georgia Supreme Court's website. And it discusses various approaches from around the country and what our pilot program would suggest.
Do you know how I could find it online?
I can email it to you directly, or I can look for it. It's somewhere, I believe it's on the Georgia Supreme Court's website.
Gotcha. We can attach that link to the description of this podcast,
All right.
so people can find it. What did you say? What was this particular term used? Like the landlord would issue blank that the client would have to answer to?
Any civil lawsuit starts with a complaint.
Okay.
And so in an eviction case in Georgia, we call it a dispossessory affidavit because it is sworn. But you can think of it as a civil complaint. And that's how a lawsuit gets started, that a plaintiff files a civil complaint and then a defendant files an answer. In an eviction case, because the nature of the proceeding has to be a quick one because the landlord is seeking to recover the use of their property, it's just a very quick turnaround that the tenant is answering in 7 days instead of 30 days like in other types of civil cases.
Gotcha. Well, that was all the questions we had today. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Learned a ton. And that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.